Thank you very much, Selene. You may have caught the fact that the Senator and I have already started talking. We'll get on with this now. Senator David Leyonhjelm is the Liberal Democrat Senator from New South Wales. I plainly say I voted for the man and I like him as well. Senator, g'day. Nice to see you. All right, you wrote a really interesting piece today that got a run in the Telegraph and other News Limited papers, and it was about domestic violence. Now, in a second I'll talk about the Northern Territory and some of the institutional responses to that, but I just quickly want to read one paragraph from it if we can here, guys, which is that you talked about how it's become sort of this political plaything, the idea that it's about, you know, the ultimate posturing that goes on in and around domestic violence and all the rest. The fight to end domestic violence has become a ridiculous political pantomime, which we are meant to believe involves predatory evil men who attack their helpless female victims. Now, at no point, let's make this nice and clear for Twitter that's half listening, you're not diminishing what's going on here, you're not having a go at the rosy baddies and all the rest of it in this piece at all. But what did you see out of some recent statistics about domestic violence, particularly in sort of outer suburban Sydney?
Yeah, what we're told is that it's everybody's problem, it happens everywhere, that it's primarily or nearly always male. There's never any mention of female perpetrators. There's never any mention of same-sex violence between women or between men. So we're told that it's everywhere, and yet the statistics show over and over again it's concentrated in certain areas, lower socio-economic groups by and large. It's more likely in certain ethnic groups, and it's very bad, of course, in the Northern Territory among some Aboriginal towns. Very, very bad.
Well, we get this thing where literally yesterday, well, the past few days I've been talking about this, 75,000 victims in the past 3 years. They have a population of 250,000. We wanted to talk to the NT Chief Minister about it. No, not available. Minister for Women, no, not available. When the Don stuff happened, we had a Royal Commission called the next day. Now, I don't know, I'm not big fan of Royal Commissions into everything, but if our sort of institutional response is, oh, well, that's the way it is.
No, what we're dealing with, what we're fighting against, if we tried to look for something similar to the Dondale reaction, would be this notion that it's all about men, and that there are TV ads saying you have to respect women, as if all men are potential wife or partner beaters, and that it's nothing to do with women. Women don't perpetrate violence at all, according to this myth, and men have to learn how to behave themselves. It's wrong. It's factually wrong. The statistics show it's wrong. There are almost as many male victims of violence as there are female victims, and men are being totally neglected. If a man goes to a police station and says, I have been assaulted by my female partner, there's a very good chance he'll get charged with some sort of violence issue. It's all wrong and it needs to change. But against the white ribbons, and if you don't wear a white ribbon, you must be endorsing domestic violence against women. You know, that's the sort of environment we're dealing with here. It's pretty hard to break through that. So, of course, the Northern Territory people will keep their heads down because they know what they're dealing with.
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting piece. I'll post it up on our Facebook page. You've got to read it here. A couple of other things I want to ask you about. What was your reaction to last week's 48% of people agreeing with a ban on Islamic immigration, the biggest reason for which being the lack of integration? There's another poll out today from Deakin University that basically shows, again, about 40-something% of people say the issue is integration. Is this a problem of Islamophobia, as the left want to call it, or a problem of the people?
Well, I think Australians are extremely tolerant towards immigration. We have a history of it, at least since the Second World War, so, you know, 70 years. We've seen migrants come to Australia in waves. There's been a little bit of nervousness as they arrived, but then we got over that when we saw they became Australians, they learnt English, they kept their food, and we liked their food. They maintained aspects of their culture, and we said, yeah, that's fine. But they never said we're not Australians. They always said we're Australians, but we have, you know, still a bit of a hankering for the old country. You know, we like to maintain a little bit of linkage back to that, and nobody minded that. What we've now seen, though, with some groups, and Lebanese would probably be the worst, but there's one or two other groups amongst them, and they all tend to be Islamic Muslims, is they don't want to integrate. They not only Some of them don't learn English. They insist on wearing Islamic dress, so they stand out from the crowd. They don't want to sort of blend in and become Australians. The Australians are feeling, okay, these people are not coming here to become Australians. They're coming here to set up a little microcosm of their old country, which they wanted to get away from, which ironically enough. I think that's what's making Australians nervous about it. I don't actually think they support banning Islamic immigration, except that if that's the only way to deal with this problem, then they probably would go along with it.
Well, my guess about that poll was that it was more of a proxy question about, because nobody's asked the question about the mix has changed. The mix has changed to be more from the Middle East, more from Africa, because that's where the refugee problem is, more than it was from Europe. So is it an issue where, I mean, we know where Pauline Hanson is, and I don't know if you're in the same part of the world to her about that, but she's a very sort of definite view about, you know, the monitoring of Islamic communities, the no more building of mosques. I disagree with her on those issues, but there is a broader cultural thing that we actually have to have a chat about here, and seemingly our mainstream leadership, if I had Malcolm Turnbull sitting here and I quoted all those stats to him, he'd say, well, give it 5 years and everyone will be okay.
Yeah, well, I don't think 5 years will be anywhere near enough. I'm a bit worried that even 50 years might not be enough. Because there is basically a refusal to integrate. I'd like to hear that word assimilate used a lot more. It's sort of become a bit incorrect, politically incorrect to use that word. I'd like to hear that a lot more. We Australians don't mind if they want to maintain their language and their food and some of their cultural things, but we don't want to hear that they have retained their attitudes towards women, for example, towards gays, towards same-sex marriage, towards working for a living instead of living on welfare, which some of them do. Some of them think that's their right, you know, to live on welfare all their life and generation after generation. I'd like to see assimilation become part of our vernacular a lot more. My party's policy on this is not to be too picky about who they are when they come in the country, but to be very, very picky about who we allow to become a citizen. Look, quite a lot of countries take a lot longer than we do before we accept people to be citizens. And of course, once you become a citizen, you vote. And then if you want to go and vote for something that we don't like, and there's a lot of you, you win. Yeah. So we think there should be a fairly serious citizenship test about liberal democratic values. What I mean by that is acknowledgement of the rights of women. Correct. Equality before the law. The sort of values that we take for granted in Australia, which they're rejecting because they're maintaining their old values when they stay here. We think those sort of things should be part of the citizenship test. Switzerland has a 10-year waiting period before you can become a citizen there, and even then you've still got to be approved, so to speak. Japan, you've got to live there for generations, and even then it's no guarantee. So it wouldn't be unusual for us to have a much more stringent citizenship test.
And that's the thing, if you have to wait longer or it's harder to get, you value it more, and especially if you go through sort of this civics and thing, it's not about knowing how many runs Don Bradman scored, it's about saying what matters more is, you know, a judge or a priest, you know, sort of argument. Anyway, a couple of other quick ones. Today, the Essential poll, again, geez, I'm giving them a good plug at the moment, about euthanasia. Today, 68% of people say yes, majority of Labor, Liberal and Green supporters. By the way, that's in the 70%, 60% and 80%. And in the other category that yourself and the other minor party people represent, 70% of people say it should happen. I think you're the only politician, the Greens every now and then sort of muck around with this stuff, but you're the one who's actually stood up in the Parliament and said, here's a bill to try to find a way to give people what they want, which is a right to end their own life when the time comes.
Well, in the previous Parliament, my view is that it's fundamentally a state jurisdiction, and that the only authority the Commonwealth Government has, and I'm in the Commonwealth Parliament obviously, is over the states and territories. So in 1997, the Andrews Bill was introduced to overturn assisted suicide or the euthanasia in the Northern Territory. And ever since then, it's been prohibited in the Northern Territory and ACT, and the states haven't been game to move on it, or haven't, for whatever reason. I introduced a bill in the last Parliament, a private senator's bill, to repeal that Andrews bill so that it would be legal for the ACT and the Northern Territory to introduce assisted suicide laws if they chose to. And it was more of a psychological thing rather than anything. If it passed, it wouldn't change anything in the states, except it would kind of send a signal to them, the coast is clear.
If you want to do it, do it.
If you want to do it, the coast is clear. In fairness, the Greens introduced a bill called Dying with Dignity or something like that in the last Parliament. I was supportive of it because I think the intention was good, but I think it was on very shaky constitutional grounds. I don't think it would have succeeded. But there is support for it, which is not just mine, for assisted suicide. Of course, Greens being Greens, they haven't seen a regulation they don't like.
Yeah, correct.
So they want to regulate it quite significantly, a bit like their attitude to marijuana. They want to regulate the hell out of it, whereas my attitude is, what the hell, get out of the way and let people get on with it. But what that opinion poll that you've just quoted, with about 70% of the population supporting that, it's been like that for about 2 decades, 2 decades. There is huge support for assisted suicide. The politicians who are standing in the way are really seriously out of step with the public, and that's every party. Every party, they're out of step with their support base. They really ought to wake up to themselves.
Well, maybe apparently the only way you can get action in Australia at the moment is you either have to have a hashtag or get something on 4 quarters. Yeah. So one of those two, if that can happen in the next little while. Finally, nanny state inquiry. Are you able to fire it up again, or was that a last Parliament thing?
I've been thinking about that. I'm thinking this Parliament, my first, I can only manage one inquiry at a time. That's partly for the resources in the Senate, and also I have to get the numbers, obviously, to get an inquiry up. I'm thinking a red tape inquiry this time might be my first one. I'll run it for a while and until I think I've explored as much as I can from a senator's point of view. We then have another look at reviving nanny state. The problem with another nanny state inquiry is we'd be going over similar ground to what we did before, and the reports that we issued, there's about 8 interim reports. They're very, very good, and I'm thinking, well, how can I improve on that?
Good stuff. Well, all the best. Anytime you need a voice, we're here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Senator David Leyonhjelm here on Paul Murray Live. Quick break, back with more with Peter Cridland and with Nicholas Rees. I think Peter might have something to say about the opinion polls today.